Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to see you here. My name is Zoe Ryder. I'm the Director for Combating Kleptocracy at the National Endowment of Democracy, which is a private foundation in the United States that supports democracy efforts around the world. Recently, we've decided to go full bore in tackling kleptocracy, and some of my colleagues are here as well, and really just honored to be invited to moderate this panel on new frontiers in using leaked data for anti-corruption research. I will introduce my colleagues shortly, but just want to say a few words as an introduction. I was going to make a joke and ask who here has heard of the Panama Papers, but it's not that funny, and you all have heard of the Panama Papers and all the other amazing leaks that have really just sent shockwaves around the world for now more than a decade. We are all better off for these leaks and the investigative journalism outfits behind them who have really been at the forefront of raising the issue of illicit flows and the ways in which they fund kleptocratic states, authoritarian states, and are, the probably I would call the most significant threat to democracy to date. And we have all been caught up in these amazing stories, and we will forever be caught up in these amazing stories, unfortunately, because fighting corruption is not something I think we'll ever see the end of, but we need to get much better. And this is the front line for getting much better, these stories and the investigations behind them. But we'd like to push a little further with all the amazing data sets that are what drives these stories. And we think that there is more depth and breadth of those stories that we can sort of pull out as we play this unsettling game of whack-a-mole in combating corruption and kleptocracy. So that's really why we're here today. We've gotten some of the, best and the brightest from the NGO space, from the investigative journalism space, to ask some of those questions about how we can make better, not better, even more significant use of the data to complement this amazing investigative journalism in order to strengthen what I would call our pattern analysis and our ability to tackle corruption in a more systemic way. So I am thrilled to introduce my colleagues. We have Annalise Burkhart from Distributed Denial of Secrets, Alexander Gillies from Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, Jimmy Kande from the Platform to Protect Whistleblowers in Africa, and David Sacconi from the Anti-Corruption Data Collective, also George Washington University, for transparency's sake. I was one of the co-founders of what we call ACDC for short, but I am here in my NED capacity, always a cheerleader for all of these groups here. So just in order to get started, we're going to ask sort of for a round of answers to the question, why is this a topic? Why is this kind of research, these sort of more academic deep dives into the underbelly of these data sets, why is it not happening at a significant scale, and what are the main reasons that it should be?
Do you want me to start?
I want you to start.
Okay, good.
Alex.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Zoe. I was really very pleased to get the invitation to participate on this, because I think this type of cooperation is one of the most promising new lines of anti-corruption work that at least I'm aware of and involved in. Like, we'll describe a bit the project we have, the research project that we're involved in, but I can say to start that one reason that I think this is so needed is that in implementing this project, it just feels right. Like, those projects where you've got great people in the room, all bringing complementary things, trying to dive into really thorny issues, and you can just tell it's the kind of cutting edge collaboration that we all, I think, want to be a part of. In addition to that, I mean, just kind of to echo some of the points that Zoe made, everyone's aware of how complex and massive the scope of the anti-corruption challenges we're facing are, whether it's enablers or global supply chains, or you pick the challenge, the scale and the complexity is huge. Combine that with really enormous quantities of data that are available and often ending up in the hands of investigative journalists that they're making great use of, but are really just scratching the surface. I think some of the other factors that call for the need of this is that there's very clear demand from enforcement authorities and also policymakers for more evidence, particularly around how to focus their limited resources. In order to help them in those decisions, you have to do big data analysis and not just look at limited cases. I work for OCCRP, which is a global network of investigative journalists, and my role at OCCRP is really around partnerships. I work on the Global Anti-Corruption Consortium, which is an initiative that we co-lead with Transparency International. And it's really about trying to expand the real-world impact of investigative journalism. And we see collaborating with more academic researchers as one of the really priority areas for growth. When I spoke with colleagues, I've been at OCCRP for about 2 years, about what does cooperation look like with academics in the past, I think it sounded like a lot of academics sending emails to people they didn't know, saying, can you help me find this? Or can I have this data set? Thereby creating more work for our research and data team who are already fielding 1 million requests from our network of journalists. And so it was clear that that wasn't working, and I hope later on I can talk a little bit more about why I think hopefully the project we're doing now has a few factors that differ from that that I think will lead to some more success.
That's great. Thank you. Annalise?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me on this panel. I'm really excited to be here. A lot of you may know me in my daytime capacity. I work with Transparency International US. I've been with them for a little over 4 years now. But I also volunteer my time. I'm on the advisory board for Distributed Denial of Secrets, or DDoS Secrets for short. It was started in 2018 as a collective of journalists and technologists. And we archive, publish, and disseminate hacked and leaked data sets. I don't really know of other groups doing what we do. We have a very specific publication model, and we work really closely with groups like OCCRP, with PPLAAF, with ACDC, in some instances, ICIJ, the list goes on and on. And I think one of the big challenges to field investigations in this space is honestly getting data into the right hands. A lot of newsrooms and organizations lack the training and the capacity to parse through large unstructured data sets. So sometimes if we receive something and we hand it off to, let's say, an academic researcher, we've actually written custom software to help them digest these large unstructured Excel files, for example. And also the issue is that there's so much data out there. We've published over probably like 65 data sets following Russia's invasion in Ukraine of Russian agencies and organizations. And it's sort of like, where do you even begin when you have millions of files, honestly? And that's why we're thankful for groups like the OCCRP. You have the ALIF software. It's like an index search engine that you can index these large data sets and actually do keyword searches. And it's so important for policymakers, to point to the revelations in these investigations and say, this is why we need change, and to have that evidence to close these loopholes. And then we've seen so many cascading actions on behalf of law enforcement agencies across the world who've been using our data to point to people laundering money or evading taxes if they've got their wealth parked offshore. And we have a variety of different data sets in our Bankers Box series, including corporate registries, internal files from banks, financial intelligence units, trust and company service providers, accounting and investment firms, and wealth and asset managers. And so, just making sure it gets into the right hands, that's a challenge, but I think we do a decent-ish job at it, so.
Yeah, and after this, we're going to ask everyone to sort of show us some of the ways in which they are working with academic researchers and other researchers. But maybe just to finish this round, Jimmy, if you want to say a little bit about those challenges.
Yes, I think that the question is going to be also how we can take advantage with all the data that we can have as a civil society, as a journalist. So the answer that we are trying to give today is to work together. If journalists, civil society, they can work, for example, with academics, that can help us to take advantage of all the data we can have. Because you have journalists, when they are working on some topics, the goal is to be the first to publish, for example, the investigation. But when you have academics, they're going to try to be focused on some methodology, some specific approach, and they don't have this pressure like they can have journalists because they want to be the first. And this can help also to analyze correctly some data that we can have. And if I have to have a focus on some context in Africa, trying to have academics in the research, it can be very important also, because you know in Africa sometimes we have two groups of civil society. And when they can support politicians that they are in power, or they can be close to the opposition, it can be very hard for politicians to listen after the investigation. But when you know that academics can bring some information, they are neutral, this can help us also to have more results, because journalists and academics, they have the common goal that is to be able to publish public information, the interest of public information for everyone. So that's why I think that it's very important to put all the stakeholders together for being able to analyze correctly the data that we can have.
Thank you. David?
Well, thank you very much for convening this panel. As Zoe said, I'm a co-founder of the Anti-Corruption Data Collective, or ACDC, which was started in 2020. My day job is I'm the token academic on the panel. I'm a professor of political science at George Washington University, specializing in corruption in Russia. But ACDC, from its inception, was designed to solve some of the challenges that we talked about on stage. That journalists, our journalist co-founder, Frederick Obermeyer, when he was working with the initial kind of Panama Papers, kind of noted that it was very hard to get other types of expertise and to work with academics and have them in at the ground floor receiving these bountiful data coming in. And he would have loved to be able to bounce ideas off and learn about the context and work closer with different communities, civil society and academics. But there's this kind of preference, at least at the time, of journalists working with other journalists. And if you're not a journalist, you're a source rather than a collaborator or partner. I think that's changing, but it's taken a long time. So ACDC was designed in order to bring together data scientists, professors, academics, journalists, and policy advocates to work on investigations together from the very beginning, and publish in multiple realms simultaneously for different audiences and with different goals. So I think what I wanted to say, one of the challenges is that a lot of people from outside academia might not totally understand what the value that academics bring to these data sets, and also how the incentives really differ. For example, we are slow, right? It's just academics are slow. I like to think we're deliberate, but we have a lot going on. Usually we're teaching and doing a lot of mentoring and projects. We just have a different pace in terms of the way we organize workflow than journalists, which are like thoroughbreds running toward the finish line. But I think that allows us to do different things and ask different questions. For example, we're just very concerned with policy evaluation. What's working, what's not? What are the institutions that are effective, and what kind of reforms might need to be improved upon? And how can data illuminate what direction we need to go? I think civil society really cares about that, but journalists are maybe just trying to tell a different story, and policy is part of that story, but it's not the centerpiece in the way that it is in a lot of academic analysis. And I think there maybe is a misconception, probably because of when people went to their unis, that the standard academic is reading a lot of books all day and writing treatises and listening to them self-talk and full of self-importance. Most of that has changed, I hope, and it's, modern academia has really informed data science in many ways, right? Like the publishing right now requires a familiarity and expertise with large quantitative data sets in most social science fields. So there's this overlap of methods, and I think is really helpful that journalists are crunching it and asking good data and crunching different ways, but civil society and academia are just as skilled in different ways in terms of working with these large structured and unstructured data sets, and can run different type of models and approach the same questions with different research designs. And I think that's really where the value add is in terms of policy evaluating, looking at patterns, zooming out, taking a broader approach that might take 12, 18, 24 months to pull off, but the impact and the reception on the part of policymakers might be more so because it's hard data, right? And sometimes that resonates more in those circles than just a front page headline. I think they both resonate in different ways, but the complementarities can make for even more impactful type of analytical work.
That's great. That's a great segue into hearing about some of the projects working with researchers that is already going on. So I'm gonna ask Alex to start us off on that. I'm just really thrilled at some of the work that OCCRP is doing on this front. So happy you're here to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm thrilled about it too. It's been a lot of fun to work on. Thank you. So when it comes to collaboration at OCCRP with academic researchers, we have two related projects, both on the topic of corruption's professional enablers. And it's great to see how much attention in general that theme is getting in the conference. This is a major priority for OCCRP. It has been for years. I mean, obviously, the role of investigative journalism and getting the enablers issue on the agenda is pretty obvious, going back to the early work of the Panama Papers and that ICIJ did there, all the subsequent leaks, right up until a few months ago, leaks on the enablers of who is helping Russian oligarchs move their money in the face of sanctions. There's a lot of great reporting, a large portion of which has been leak-driven. And so part of OCCRP's motivation in getting involved in these two projects was wanting to kind of think about the next generation of reporting on enablers, and particularly how can we acquire new sources of data on enablers that can inform our reporting. And so that's kind of OCCRP's interest in this work. And I think one reason the project is going pretty well is that both sides are getting something out of it. It's not one side doing a favor for the other or vice versa. And so for OCCRP, both of these projects will hopefully result in new data resources that will inform future reporting. The first is part of the UK's anti-corruption evidence program, and it's a cooperation led by the University of Exeter with the University of Oxford, colleagues who some of you I'm sure know, John Heathershaw, Ricardo Suarez de Oliveira, Tom Main, Tenna Prelic, a really great team of political scientists who work on transnational corruption, and then partnering with us at OCCRP. The idea is to leverage some of OCCRP's data tools and databases. Annalise mentioned ALIF, which is kind of our main database, but also the expertise that's in our people. We have a pretty good-sized data and research team who are actively involved in this project. And the plan is it's pretty simple in some ways, and it's interesting how complex executing it has been. The idea is to identify a list of politically exposed persons who have connections to corruption, and then as comprehensively as possible, map out who their enablers have been. So who has been willing to provide services to some of the most renowned PEPs in the corruption space. And then by gathering that data, drawing on OCCRP's sources, but also some of the work that the academic researchers are doing, we think we'll get stories out of that. We think that that will actually produce new interesting findings, such as about enablers who are servicing PEPs from multiple regions. That could be a great story. You could see that that's a news story. For the academic researchers, they want to do network analysis and really look at how different networks of enablers are servicing PEPs across jurisdictions, across time. No one at OCCRP does network analysis, so really complementary, but hopefully drawing on the same data. The second project is kind of another pathway, but with the same goal. This one is also in collaboration with the University of Exeter, and we're grateful to support from the FCDO's Lissel Finance and Anti-Corruption team for this. And for this part of the project, we're working with the same political scientists, but we're also working with some computer science experts at Exeter. So again, kind of tapping into expertise found in academia that we don't have in-house. And in this project, the computer science colleagues are developing AI models that can extract enabler data from repositories of documents that OCCRP has, but also past OCCRP reporting. So the goal is after that the models that we're kind of starting to develop and test now will spit out worksheets with data in them about service providers, dates on which services were provided, clients. And again, that becomes a resource that when we stumble across an enabler of interest, we can run it through that data and see what other clients they had. What else has this enabler or service provider been up to? So both are kind of hopefully, and we're having interesting conversations about how the data collected through the two streams can talk to each other and how we can share it with others. But that's kind of a quick overview of what we're doing. We've just gotten started on both, so
that's
no
great.
findings or anything yet.
That's great. And those findings will be at least several reports by these universities, right?
Yes, that's great. The goal, yeah.
Thank you. Annalise? Can someone shut the door? Is it me?
Yeah.
I kind of like the background.
I feel like
music.
we're missing a party over there, though.
They're
Thank you all for
practicing the
being here,
music
not
for
there.
tonight's thing. Yeah, that's better.
So regarding specific projects, when I was told that I had 7 minutes for this, and I could probably talk about different investigations using DDoS secrets data for the next 45 minutes, but I'm going to try to keep it short. I joined the team back in 2019, and I think in the first leak that I worked on was 29 Leaks, which was a UK company service provider, Formations House, and they had been formed in 2001. They had sold about 400,000 shell and shelf companies to just a wide variety of actors. So Croatian car smuggling ring, Italian crime families. There was one story that came out. It was really crazy. They had been doing services for a Florida man who was caught in a sting operation trying to purchase Russian anti-tank weapons from what he thought was a Mexican drug cartel. And then it ended up coming out, it turned out it was the DEA. Yeah, we released the Formations House. It was 1 million internal files from this trust and company service provider. We worked with OCCRP really closely on that, formed a consortium of about 20 news outlets from around the world to work on it. And that was really fun. Shortly after, we published internal files from the Cayman National Bank and Trust. And this was a bank that had already caught some heat from the Department of Justice. Back in 2016, 2 of its subsidiaries were charged with assisting U.S. clients in evading, I think it was $130 million in taxes. Matt Collin, who's an economist, I think well known in these communities, published a working paper for the Brookings Institution, and he looked at the different accounts at Cayman National with a particular focus on their offshore clients, and he found that the average client held 150 times what their respective national income was, and the disparity was even more stark in other cases. I think the Nigerian clients held on average 150 times what the national income was in these accounts. Global Witness did a great investigation on some schemes that there was a very rich Russian billionaire who was using companies banking with Cayman National, and they were avoiding paying up to $1 billion in value-added tax by setting up shell companies to act as VAT-exempt aircraft leasing businesses. Which, again, I mean, this is a scheme that you probably wouldn't really know it's in the works until you have, these kinds of revelations. But again, just to show the breadth of DDoS secrets releases, this is completely separate, following the 2021 coup of the democratically elected leader in Myanmar, we received their entire corporate registry, complete with beneficial ownership information, files from their investment commission, tax agency, and Inwa Bank, which is a Burmese bank that catered to the military there, the junta. And in these files, it showed the corporate structure of Myanmar Economic Holdings and Myanmar Economic Corporation, which were the 2 big holding companies that the junta just completely financially benefited from. And within those 2 holding structures, there were over 100 businesses spanning almost every sector of the economy. I mean, agriculture, import-export, mining, banking, alcohol, And we worked with this group called Justice for Myanmar. They're a diaspora group of activists, economists, researchers, and they started releasing these investigations. And they're pretty incredible. There was one, I always have to go back to the notes about it because it was pretty crazy. It had to do with one of the major telecommunications providers in Myanmar, Mytel. They're also one of the 4 big national carriers. And another company called Pinnacle Asia. And the daughter of the general that led the coup was a shareholder in Pinnacle Asia. Well, Pinnacle Asia received a contract to build mobile phone towers for Mytel. And kind of unsurprisingly, the military held a 28% stake in Mytel. Well, it came out that another Burmese bank, Yoma Bank, granted a substantial loan to Pinnacle in 2020 to finance the construction of those mobile phone towers. And when the loan was made, the World Bank actually held 5% equity in the bank, in addition to Norway's State Development Finance Fund, Norfund, and I think also Singapore's Sovereign Wealth Fund. When all this comes out, they exited. It came out that Carlsberg and Heineken were also doing business. Carlsberg stayed in the country through a proxy company, but following these releases, just sanctions came down the line. U.S., UK, EU authorities. And then, as Alex mentioned, of course, there was the big Cyprus confidential investigation that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. We received Merit Capital, Merit Service, DJC Accountants, and Callias and Associates, and those were some of the data sets that served as the backbone of these investigations. And what we found out a month before, Merit Service, Merit Capital, they reorganized all of Roman Abramovich's trusts. I think it was 10 trusts with over $4 billion worth of assets to designate those trusts to the names of his kids to avoid sanctions. And so it's really great to see the impact of these data sets when we are able to get them into the right hands of these experts and the different revelations that come out of them. I will be just sitting on a flight somewhere just reading through these stories before going to a conference, and I can't wrap my head around the impact and also just the different countries and nonprofits, news organizations that we've been able to work with, and the list goes on, but that just kind of scratches the surface.
And do you find that the work, so you've talked about Matt Collins, who's an economist, and some researchers in Myanmar. Do you find that the way that they're working with the data is somehow different and complementary, or is
I'd say complementary. Again, we don't do our own investigations. Now, once we evaluate a data set for its authenticity, we'll be able to provide some context depending on what it is when we hand it off to someone. This is what you should look at. There are a few different leads in here. And that's what I have fun, at night, because I just do this in my spare time, going through these leaks and looking for leads. And it's fun to be able to pass that along and say, I think you should this is a rabbit hole you can go down, and I hope that you can actually flesh this out into a story, and then to see with the Cayman National Bank and Trust, soon after that happened, Belgium announced their tax authority was okay, we're going to be looking into the Belgian account holders here, and I'm assuming that other countries followed. They maybe just didn't publicly announce it as Belgium did. So
great, thank you, fellas. You want to talk about what you two are up to together?
Yeah, maybe I can start. So I think that David gone ahead about the projects that we are preparing. So it's very important for you to understand a bit the story about behind this project. So our organization called Platform to Protect Whistleblower. We used to protect whistleblower in Africa. As you know, that there is we don't have law. Many countries in Africa, they don't have law to protect whistleblower. Even the country where you can have a law, it's very hard to apply the law to protect them. So we used to help them to have more impact with the revelation. So we're gonna investigate about the revelation about the revelation of the whistleblower, and we're gonna try to work with the media for having more impact, because we are thinking that if the opinion can talk about the story of the whistleblower, maybe it can bring change. That's why in 2021 we had this project called Congo Hold Up. Congo Hold Up is considered today the largest leak of financial information in Africa. So this leak contained over 3.5 million of documents coming from BGFI Bank in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the headquarters of this bank is in Gabon. And during more than 6 months, we put together international media and international NGOs to work about this leak. And we were able to find in this leak some bank statements, emails, contracts, bills, corporate records, and the details of billions of banking transactions linked to the former president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So in 2021, this record were examined, as I said, by dozens of media and international NGOs, generating important insights and uncovering many complex corruption networks. We were able to see how corruption was able to start in the Democratic Republic of Congo and to be able to buy some properties in the United States, to buy some properties in South Africa, everywhere. So that's why it was also very important for us when we were working in this project to have media from everywhere and to have also NGO working around the world to be able to understand. But as I said before, when we were working in these projects, we didn't have in our group academic researcher. So our purpose was not to improve the policy, so it was just to be able to alert the opinion about what was not going well to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And after this research, we have some action, for example, in Justice Now, in Belgium, in Switzerland, in France, and we can see how NGO or civil society with the media that can work together. But in this new project that we are having, ACDC, we want to be able to understand the mechanism, because we are talking about in the Congo hold-up about money laundering, corruption, but we have to be able also to understand what happened exactly, what kind of transaction that we used to find, for example, in banking in Africa, for being able to bring some solutions. And I think that is that way that we are trying to work with ACDC to know how we can have as new information is with the same data that we were analyzing with journalists and civil society to bring something new with this approach that the academics can help us to have.
Thank you.
I'll take it from there.
Yeah.
I think our collaboration started with a tweet by Matt Collin, whose ears must be burning, because that's the third time his name's been mentioned on the stage. And he was lamenting the lack of data sharing by big, mostly journalistic organizations with academics. And I think, John, you saw that tweet and said, wait, I represent such an organization, and we're very open to that kind of collaboration. We should meet at IACC 2022, was when we first started talking. And it was clear from the beginning that this was the opportunity that we had been waiting for years at ACDC. We had been really struggling to convince other partners that there was value to this type of collaboration. And it didn't take much to convince us, or in PLAAF, that this was going to reap dividends. We've been very fortunate to have the project funded by GIACE, which has been very encouraging and supportive for this. Right? We thank them for that. So what are we trying to do? Well, like Jimmy already mentioned, we're really focused on policy and what policies could be improved to combat money laundering, especially trade-based money laundering coming out of the Democratic Republic of Congo in the recent past. So what does that look like? Well, over the last couple of decades, there's been de-risking, and there's been a lot of concerns about banks coming from the Congo and how they're managing and scrutinizing transactions. And Western financial institutions have supposedly pulled back and been much more cautious about facilitating illicit financial flows or financial flows in general from the country. But we don't really know whether or not de-risking is a good approach for tackling this problem, because it also means cutting off financial access to the country, and it could push a lot of these flows into even darker or more underground channels and have a counterproductive approach. So these debates are ongoing in policy circles, but no one's studied this from an analytical or really had any empirical data to say whether or not this is something that banks should be practicing when they're alerted to problems happening in their domestic counterparts. The second is that this leak came from a whistleblower, but they weren't the first whistleblower. There was another whistleblower, I think in 2016, from the same bank, and it caused national headlines, and there was a lot of investigative work about the problems that were happening. So from a whistleblower organization, there's a lot of interest into what impact does whistleblowing have on a bank's internal operations, on the client's enthusiasm for continuing to work with that bank, for international partners and how they treat it. So we all want to encourage whistleblowers, but we know much less about the impact of whistleblowing and what we should expect and what we shouldn't expect from these data sets entering the public eye. And then, of course, we want to do a lot of mapping, right? They've done an incredible job before we even got our hands on the data to squeeze really, really, really terrific stories, sad stories, but terrific stories from the data. But there's patterns, and there's other types of schemes that might not have been obvious going one by one, but if you zoom out a little bit, you might be able to see the way that money is flowing in different and complicated and kind of unknown ways. And we've already have a couple leads that we're pursuing about kind of back-channel underground partnerships that are moving money across borders in both small and big amounts, and shell companies being formed, and that type of thing there's been some reporting on, but the type of analysis that we're most excited about is to say, here are the numbers, right? Here's the overtime analysis. Here's how this partnership dissolved and 3 sprung up the next week in order to take its place. And sometimes that is a good story for journalists, and sometimes it's a better story for policymakers and academics who might be more interested in that type of overtime, slower, data-driven graphing, plotting, figuring, that kind of approach, rather than kind of a juicy antagonist who's responsible for the bad and criminal activity. So yeah, we're very excited. It took 6 months to get approval from the lawyers at my university. So for those of you that think that academics can't be trusted, I've got 7 Zoom calls to show you that you're wrong. We have institutional review boards. There have been medical experiments for centuries in universities. So there are elaborate, complex procedures that we had to go through in order to even get access to the data, much less work with it. Our lawyers were afraid because they didn't know. No one had ever come to them and said, look, this data is valuable. Can we analyze it? But you know, with many Zoom calls and a lot of kind of open communication, they're on board with this. So it's not, there's this misperception, I think, of civil society and academics fumbling around, posting data online that shouldn't be posted. But no, we have faced severe consequences for mishandling data, not respecting privacy and integrity with our affiliations at universities, and a lot of times it's honestly stricter than in the media community because there has been so many abuses in the medical community in the 20th century. They spawned an industry of IRB approvals that we have to play by the rules at or go to jail. I think there's actually severe legal penalties for violating data protections as an academic.
I don't want to see you in jail, David.
That's why I had the Zoom calls.
That's great. That's a great segue into some of the challenges in ethics. I think it's great to see these sort of emerging partnerships that we're touching on here. And I'm wondering if maybe, Alex, you're in the perfect place to talk about what some of the challenges are and how do you get from those challenges to win-win, as you were talking about.
Yeah, I tried to think about what can make it win-win and what can work. And I'm happy to talk about some of the challenges. You know, these are complex partnerships, and the cooperations that are most worthwhile are often the most challenging because you're bringing 2 very different types of organizations together. So maybe, can I talk about what I think works a little bit, and then we can talk about the challenges more? So I tried to think of like what some of the factors might be that would lead to a successful type of this collaboration. Because I think from what we've seen so far with these projects, but also there's some great academic work out there on Russian wealth advisors, on Dubai real estate data. Like there's early efforts at this collaboration that are producing fantastic results. And so if we want to get more of it, maybe what are some early lessons on what works? I think it is about trying to generate a win-win. And I came up with a list of 5 ideas. One is, I mean, kind of obvious, but working on a topic of shared priority. I think previously at OCCRP, the requests from researchers would often get lost because the journalists weren't interested in the topic or the question that the researcher was after. And so the priority of replying to that email just went way down. So it's simple, but have something that both groups are passionate about. The second is, again, kind of obvious, but complementary skills. I can only really speak from our experience, but we have a research team, we have a data team, and so I think for this project, it's bringing in different types of research and data expertise. We do not have the machine learning expertise that Exeter's computer science department has. And so that's adding tremendous value to the data expertise that we do have. So that kind of pairing of complementary and not overlapping skills. Mm-hmm. The third is that I mean, this wouldn't be necessary, but it sure helps a lot if both parties think they're going to get good work out of it. I think these projects are going to lead to journalism. They're going to lead to OCCRP publishing news stories, and they're going to lead to great academic journal publications, policy briefs, et cetera. So having kind of the potential for it to be both. The fourth is a resourcing issue. All parties are incurring costs with this project, and I think that's important for them all to be resourced for that. Obviously, the researcher's time is really important. From our experience, you know, acquiring, hosting, processing data on this scale is massively expensive. The storage costs alone that we pay monthly are unbelievable, tens of thousands of dollars. Plus, you know, we have all this data that we haven't even processed yet. It's in cold storage, they call it, because we don't have the manpower. And so huge, really resource intensive, and we want other people to come and use the data. But what has been really, and I'm grateful to our funders here, is that a small portion of these projects is going to defray some of the data operating costs that OCCRP has. And I think another key function is kind of the coordination, or making sure that there's an intermediary in the project design that can speak to the academics and understand their world, speak to the journalists and understand their world. I think that's why ACDC's model is amazing, is it recognized the need for that intermediary. You know, the team that I work on at GAC is trying to kind of play that go-between role. I think that's something not to be forgotten in the project design. And then the fifth thing is trust. I mean, the challenging issues around ethics, confidentiality, you know, maintaining appropriate roles for each of these parties and not kind of asking people to step outside their lane. All of those things can be managed through a series of quite subjective decisions about the best way forward. And I think that can only happen if the parties have trust. And I think it's not a coincidence that I and others have known some of the academics we're working with for years, and we know their work, and they get it. Like, they've also faced slap suits and understand what it's like to kind of try to work in a kleptocratic context. And so I think that kind of shared understanding of each other's work environments and just personal trust is really important too.
Thank you. What have you seen as some of your concerns with just, you get a request from Matt Collin, that guy. What are you?
I guess I could provide a little bit of overview of like our publication model, because I think it's extremely unique. And you know, one thing that I'm always asking myself is like, the balance between the public's right to know and then the ethics of dealing with hacked and leaked data sets. You know, because again, a lot of the information in here deserves to get out, and it's a way to hold, you know, corporations, government agencies accountable. But you know, if we receive a data set, it's kind of like a tree of like, you know, path one is depending on like what the source wants and what is in the data set. Well, actually, first we verify the authenticity of it, and then we ask ourselves, is this in the public interest? If it is, then you know, proceed to gate 2, and then we decide, okay, maybe we can create a consortium of groups to investigate this data set, and then we will negotiate an embargo with them and have them sign a contract and say, all right, you have 6 months to go through this. If we want to bring in, you know, a third, fourth, fifth party to it, we'll talk about that. And you know, the 29 leaks, the Formations House, for instance, you know, that was, I think, 4 or 5 months of an embargo, and the same with Cyprus Confidential, a lot of other investigations like that. For other data sets, depending on the sensitivity of its contents, we'll either list it for just like, you can grab the torrent online, you can download it immediately, or we add it to our limited distribution category. And you can kind of think of us as like a library, you know, like go check out a book or you go check out a data set. Some of it's publicly available, some of it is in our reserved books section. And if it's listed as limited distribution, that means you have to write to us, and you have to be an accredited researcher, academic, or with a news outlet to gain access. You have to agree to a certain set of conditions and terms, not to share, recopy, republish the data anywhere, just to make sure, you know, it's being handled properly. It's going to be actually formally announced at a conference next month, but we are rolling out a new system soon for accessing our limited distribution data sets. Also, just because a lot of us are doing this in our volunteer time, like in the evenings after our day jobs. Whenever I have calls with people, it's in the evening. Like, we've all left our jobs, we're like really tired, but we're putting in time on this, and we're answering people's requests to get access for data because we want to get it out the door. And yeah, we try to grant them in a timely fashion, but we're rolling out a new system next month where people will actually have like two-factor authentication, UB keys. We're going to be striking up agreements with different newsrooms, et cetera, et cetera. But that's sort of how we handle it. You know, we're not just like dumping all this data online, because these data sets, it contains really sensitive information, you know? And also, like, we are a 501c3 in California, and so we want to make sure we're doing everything by the books. And then it always does help, you know, when we work with groups like OCCRP, ICIJ, European Investigative Collaborations, PPLAAF, I mean, the list goes on and on. We've been worked with so many different reporting partners at this point. And then in certain cases also, there have been trusted intermediaries where they'll say, hey, you know, we went through this data set. If we give them early access, they're like, I know you all were thinking of listing it publicly, but you know, we found this document in here. You should pull that, or you shouldn't make it public. And so we always try to source the advice of others too to determine how to proceed.
And if you have a terabyte of data, and you know, someone asks you, let's say you have a terabyte of data related to who's sort of got the, who is naturalized through golden passports. Someone asks you for that data, and they say, we'd like it. You know, I'm an academic. I want to do whatever kind of analysis I want to bring to that. How hard is it to just to anonymize it?
That's something that we haven't really done in the past. And going forward, if we actually had more bandwidth and resources, we've talked about that. Like, what can we make public? Can we actually crowdsource where people who are accessing our limited distribution category are able to actually pick out documents and say, this should not be, you know, publicly available, or moving forward, you know, maybe these like 30, 40 files could be made public. And so we've discussed that as a way of moving forward.
So, Jimmy, when PPLAAF is thinking about working with David or someone that looks a lot like David, what are some of the concerns that you have before you get started, and how, as working with ACDC, sort of change how you think about some of the challenges? And what do you think people thinking about trying to multiply this kind of cooperation should be having in mind?
Yeah, so I think that for us, what is very important, because we used to work with Whistleblowers, we want them to be able to understand that the revelation, so they can bring change. So for us, we used to think about what is the way that we can use for having more impact and trying to bring change in the country where we are having some specific problems. So in the case of Congo hold-up, for example, there is a lot of organizations that they were involved, but the feedback that we were having from politicians, it was not the feedback that we wanted to have before starting the projects. That's why we are thinking that having organizations like ACDC, that they can bring something new, it can help us also to be able to have some discussion with some politicians, because we're going to have some result from academics, and they're going to be able to understand our action comparing when it's only with media, because you know that when you work with media or NGO, sometimes it's very hard to have some result, because when we are talking about corruption in Africa, you're going to find most of politicians involved. And they are the same person that they are supposed to take the decision for bringing change in the country. So it can be very hard. But when we can bring these aspects of the projects that we can have with ACDC, it can help us to achieve our goal and to bring change in the community where we are. And at the end, as I said before, that the problem is to be also able to advocate for having more law to protect whistleblowers, because we're going to say that all the change that we're going to have now, or all the information that we were able to provide you and the solution or recommendation, is because there is someone who decided to reveal, to blow the whistle and to expose all the bad practices that we are having in the country. That's why I think that this kind of collaboration is supposed to bring something new and another voice that a politician can listen. And I'm talking about the specific context in Africa where we can have this civil society that is not able to be just neutral. So sometimes it's very hard even for politicians to follow the recommendation of civil society. That's why I think that to bring this actor that's going to bring another aspect in the projects, it can help us to achieve our goal.
That's great. Did you want to add to that?
Honestly, the 5 things you said and everything else that's been said have been fantastic. I would add just, when we started this, I thought I was a savvy news consumer, right? I'm addicted to news just like everybody else, and I thought I understood what journalism was, and I was proven very quickly to be woefully ignorant about journalistic incentives, journalistic norms, like defining the public interest, and I don't think that's just me. I think most academics consume media intelligently, but don't really understand the production process, don't understand news cycles, don't understand hooks, don't understand sourcing and giving comment. We didn't go to journalism school, and I've learned it on the fly, but I think we all could do better about bringing interested journalists and interested academics together and kind of sharing professional norms and sharing culture and really sharing incentives, because what I care about is a peer-reviewed publication or book, and I don't think journalists necessarily understand what that means. They think every leak is full of peer or high-quality academic articles. Well, it's not, right? There are some things that have already been said, and that the value add of spending a lot of time on that question for an academic is small, even if the perception from the journalist is like, just go and write an article. I'm sure you can get it published next month. And there's also been times where journalists have approached us and basically saw us as their free data consultants, right? We're just, like academics are there to help them rather than with their own set of interests and objectives. And there's not a lot of communication about why, that's not what the scholarly, the civil society community is here for, is to help journalists do their job. We're all in it to discover new things and to increase impact. So I think all of these things can be communicated, but they are different communities, I think, for a reason, and they've evolved in different directions. The boundaries or the gaps are not insurmountable, but they're credible. They're visible, and I think we could do better about both sides being open to understanding the culture and the incentives better than I think. It's not like it's our fault. There's not been a lot of opportunities to learn all this stuff, but there's work to be done, I think, on both sides in terms of collaboration.
Absolutely. I'm going to open it up to questions in a minute. I just want to go back to you, Alex, because I took notes on everything you said, and I think it's really helpful to thinking about next steps, how you create the conditions for that kind of collaboration. But I remember ICIJ, one of their editors, saying in a panel, we need the dead bodies, right? We need to tell the story. We need those dead bodies, and that draws in the audience, and that's really the most important first step to system change is getting people to care about the issue and understand aspects of it. But academics work in such sort of slow time, and also they're not always sure what they want to see, what they're going to see from the data. So is that sort of, so there's 2 things that can happen. Let's say an academic who is well reputable, people vouch for them, and they want to look at a problem set. What if that doesn't fit in what OCCRP cares about right now? you know, what if it is about a niche topic that they think they can do something with, they're not clear yet, and it's going to take a while? I mean, does that already mean a non-starter? Is there other ways to identify collaboration where you don't both know where you're trying to go at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, with the projects that I mentioned, they feel pretty open-ended and experimental, which is good, but it means they may not, like, I think that there'll be stories that come out of this for OCCRP and papers that come out, but you know, we're trying new stuff, and so we're willing to take that risk because it is an issue that's really important, and what we're getting out of the partnership seems very unique, but I don't know, we'll see what happens. So that feels kind of open-ended. I mean, we're a nonprofit journalism organization. We've got this GAC program, which is a bit unique, and so I don't see necessarily like a commercial mainstream media organization investing in these kinds of collaborations because the incentives, you know, it probably wouldn't work. So I think that's another obvious, perhaps, factor in all this. I think that there are, you know, the projects like the ones that we've been describing here, there are lighter touch ways of working, and we're kind of exploring what those can be. Kind of, how can we field some of the requests that come from academics to look at certain data or ask questions about investigations, because we really want to see our reporting have as much of an impact as possible. And so are exploring ways of like how to, you know, we have a research desk that really exists to field research requests from journalists around the world. Like if you're a journalist working on a story and you run into some Cayman Islands shell company, you can write to OCCRP's research desk and our research team will see if they can figure it out. So having discussions about like to what extent can or should we divert resources from that to field requests from NGOs, from researchers. It's tricky, as you'd imagine. It's a resourcing question. But I think that there's some potential there because at least like the end goal is clear, is to like get the best use out of all this data that's sitting there and all this reporting we've done. So I think there probably are different modalities, but it's yeah, figuring them out, I guess.
I'm going to open it up to questions. Yes, please. I don't know. Do we have a? There's the mic.
Thank you very much. I'm Roland Papp from Transparency International EU. And you mentioned that when the first thing when you get a data leak is about the, checking the authenticity of that data set. And that's also, if you could explain a bit more about that, how it goes. And that's also for the others, because I think it's very interesting and very different for like academia and journalism, of like how to verify this information. If you could tell us a bit about this. Thank you.
Do you want to do a round or one at a time?
Do you want to start, or I can?
Well, we have one more question over here, and then we'll do another 3 questions. Okay, him and then him. We'll do 3 at a time.
Is this on?
Yeah.
So I'm Paul Hayward. I run the GIACE program, which funds 2 of the projects which have been mentioned. So my question is about the nature of the leaks, because obviously it's stochastic. You know, the leaks happen because they happen, and therefore you use the information. But we don't really have a sense of what they're actually representing, or we might not have a sense of what they're representing. So the question is whether organizations like OCCRP or DDoS or ACDC kind of step back and ask that question as to, is this something that we should reflect on? What's the bigger story, if any, that it's telling us? Or do you just simply focus on the information that you've got because that's all you've got and there's nothing more that can or should be said about it?
There's a gentleman right there.
My name is Olu Jayebo, Jury Trust Center, Abuja, Nigeria. I just want further elaboration. I think David had mentioned the interaction with the university lawyers, and I think Anna had talked about public interest. Now, in the US, the jurisprudence on First Amendment is very elaborate and very liberal. Now, when you go to other jurisdictions, it's not as liberal. And I'm just wondering, how do you navigate the legal terrain in terms of data privacy, national security? And do you engage your lawyers on all these batches before making them available, or you just make an internal judgment on public interest? So I'm concerned about just some further insight into how you navigate those legal issues outside of the US, because data liability is not necessarily national. It could have cross-border implications.
It's a terrific set of questions. Who wants to go first? We're going to do a round of 3, and then we'll get Anne on the next round.
I could start. For verifying the authenticity of the data set, thankfully I'm not the expert on this. Some of my colleagues are engineers. They've been able to look at the metadata. There was one data set that we published with the clarification that we had actually found out that it had been altered, which in a way is a story of itself. By the time it had found us, it had passed through, I think, 2 or 3 different hands. Sometimes, we will source data from like a ransomware that we pull from a forum board. We work with academics, actually Harvard Institute of Quantitative Social Science, on some ransomware leaks. And then sometimes, it's the source that we're directly in contact with. And we're really good about source protection. All that information is very much siloed. But those are just some, like a few of the methods that we've used to verify the authenticity. Let's see, what else do I have here? Paul, I think you had kind of brought up like the circumstance of the leak as the story, if I'm kind of understanding your question correctly.
It's about reflecting on the data story that tells us.
So I actually think one of the most interesting points I could make on that are the Russia leaks that we received. And that also leads into the third question about legal issues. Luckily, we haven't had any legal issues in the United States. We have a team of lawyers that have helped us evaluate different releases. They've said yes, they've said no on what we've published. And again, we only publish data in the public interest. One time, and we were quite open about this, it's on a Substack post, but someone tried to leak to us code that was part of a NATO cloud computing software. This is like a serious national security risk. It's not in the public interest. That's just like why are you giving that to us? Please don't give that to us. Like, we don't want it. And so we posted about it. We're like, someone tried to give this to us. We're being transparent about it. We're not posting it because we only publish data in the public interest. But I think the Russia stuff is really interesting, and we do have a court case against us there, apparently. I don't really know what the status of that is. I think that was after we published over 800 gigabytes from their state surveillance censorship agency, Roskomnadzor. And then the New York Times did this really great investigation. It took them 8 months going through the data. They kind of didn't credit us at first, which kind of sucked, so we had to get on their case about that. But The Intercept had also gone through a lot of the Russia leaks, and OCCRP too had organized around that. And so I don't think that I can go to Russia anytime soon. To say the least. The Cayman Islands also called us a criminal hacking organization. They had put out a press release after we published Cayman National Bank and Trust. So I haven't tried to fly through that airport yet. I might not bring any devices with me when I do, but I'll just pick another island to go to.
So kind of on all 3 questions, one point I want to make is that I do think as another way to encourage this type of work, there could be some shared exploration of some of these research ethics issues so that each university doesn't have to invent from scratch what does it mean for our staff to work with different types of leaked data. And because these are, in some ways, each data set in each project will have its own specificities. There's no getting around that. But there are some common questions that have come up already, and maybe that could be an interesting way that we could encourage this type of cooperation in the future. I mean, in our databases, there's been a lot of discussion of leaks, but there's a number of different types of data that carry with them different risks. You know, in ALIF, a lot of it is publicly available data that we're regularly scraping from property registers, mining cadasters, beneficial ownership registers. And so there, it's more that we're doing the work of scraping it and putting it into a piece of software that's relatively user-friendly. And so there aren't really the same use issues, but that's still of value to academics who want to use that data. We also buy data, so come out from commercial data providers. So that has its own terms of use issues that, you know, have implications for this work. There's leaks that come from partners like DDoS, like ICIJ, that are available to OCCRP journalists because of the terms of agreement, but any additional use of that data by other partners, including academic partners, would have to be discussed with wherever we got it from in the first place. There's leaks that we get ourselves, which we have more control over, but some of those do come from problematic, untrustworthy, potentially unethical sources, so different hacking operations, that kind of thing. And so those might be kind of the thorniest when we think about, you know, just the implications. Not that we can't work together on it, but like, let's be careful about how we're managing the relative risks. I mean, I know less about the research ethics guidelines on the academic side, but for us, I mean, we have a fact-checking system that verifies any data that we put into a published story. And so that would apply to anything that would come out of these projects. And so that's kind of how we verified, that's the ultimate verification step, is before publication, having to be able to verify every piece of information that's in a story. And so we wouldn't deviate from that process around any of these projects.
Thank you. Do you have any answers for us?
Sure, I'll take some of the other questions that haven't been responded. So Paul, you're totally right. This is a random event. That's when leaks make it out into the world. It's still early going in terms of how we're getting access to this. We were trying to come up with this panel for how many different examples of collaboration we could come up with. And I think it was on one hand, we could count the number of times where this has been successfully pulled off. So we don't have enough instances of research to even do some kind of comparisons between what we're learning. I think for every single publication that we've come up with, we're trying to contextualize it and understand where is this bank in the larger international financial ecosystem? How specific are its political connections, and would that be replicated in other countries with the same kind of emerging market status, or is it just so specific because of the way that the family relations work that maybe the practices that are happening there are not as widespread? But it's still trying to uncover practices that are new to many people, including policymakers and academics. So we're not even at the stage yet where we can start thinking about, is this happening elsewhere, because we're trying to understand what's happening in the first place. But I hope in the next decade or so, it seems like we've got this accelerating drip of leaked data and really intrepid hackers. I think this is going to be a really vibrant cottage industry. Academics are data hungry, and now it seems like so much is coming online. So I have high hopes for the future for meta-analysis and edited volumes and really kind of reflective pieces about what we're doing here. But right now we just don't have enough cases to really think real critically about it. And then the last thing, I think I want to agree with Alex about this, the legal issues. One, so I think if the lawyers they have two roles. The first is they want to protect the data and protect the subjects. So that's about, making sure your servers are secure, making sure that you're following best practices in terms of safety and security. The other side of it is when you go to publish, are you abiding by libel laws and respecting subjects and that kind of thing in another sense. So my university lawyers are not as concerned about the second one as they are the first one. And that's great, honestly, because one of the nice things about the model that we've worked with PPLAAF is that I'm not going to be publishing any news stories about naming names. That's not going to go in any academic paper. That will always go through a journalistic partner, which will have their own lawyers look at it, and I'm just going to hand things over. And I'm extremely comfortable and excited about that. And then when I have academic work, they
lawyers will also look at it, including my lawyers, and all the lawyers will look at everything. But that when anything comes under my name is not going to is going to be addressing things that have already been put into the public realm and vetted by media lawyers, right? And I think that is a very comforting relationship that we've established, because I don't even trust my university lawyers to understand it as well as lawyers working in the industry who just have a lot more experience. And I think that's a key tenet to the working relationship. And I think it sounds like the same of what you all are doing too. There's lots of lawyers. They specialize in different things, so.
The good enablers that are helping us, yeah.
Do you want to add to that, Jimmy?
Maybe I'm going to talk about our experience, for example, because we used to work with whistleblowers. Sometimes they used to bring some data to us. So we used to take a lot of time. So even for taking the decision, for example, that we're going to work with this whistleblower, we have to make sure that, for example, about all the document he's bringing to us, that is authentic, and the story that he's telling to us is true. So we're going to take a lot of time, and we're going to involve also other actors before taking this decision to work with him and to be able to publish the story or not. So.
Thank you. We'll do one more round of questions, starting with Anna, and then the gentleman to her right.
Hi, I'm Anna Myers, Executive Director of the Whistleblowing International Network. So I will never forget the name ACDC. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, Jimmy, and the work with ACDC about, and it kind of relates to the question about the bigger story. And a lot of whistleblowers have bigger stories about their own position. And Jimmy, you started to explain what I was going to ask you, but I was wondering if you could sort of position it, because whistleblowers have a couple of things, which is if the information's going to an organization that can do the data, and then you're saying that the journalists you'll use for the stories, there may be, against an organization like PPLAAF or other organizations working with whistleblowers, really thinking about that pivot. Because when stories are published can affect a whistleblower who's also fighting for survival, and how PPLAAF you deal with that issue, and how you're not trying to, whistleblowers can help in authenticity because they're insiders, but they also can want to run the story in the way they see the story, and how do you handle that and the data and then the journal? These are two really important pivots for protecting a whistleblower. And does it make it easier that it comes from a whistleblower, or does it make it harder when, in a sense, a lot of people will say to me, it's so much easier when it's anonymous data. We don't have to deal with other humans. But is it, we also want to know what this story is, because there's a lot, as you say, Jimmy, of policy changes that can happen because of a whistleblower, which humanizes the data.
Thank you. My name is Lanre Suraj from HEDA in Nigeria. My two questions are, one, how do we get to move data just from beyond being data to information? So, which is where you have challenges with people picking it up. So when you have those critical data and people are unable to connect it to the information that can then take it to the next level for the kind of work that they do, then it becomes a challenge. So how do we present it in form of information and then also assist those who can then take it forward from there? And the other thing is, how do we use this data to address institutional change rather than individual cases? So it is not just sufficient that somebody stole money from Nigeria and these are information. How do we link it to the processes and institutions that facilitate those kind of corruption and other that? Thanks.
Just a quick question. So my name's Simon Taylor. I'm here representing Hawkmoth, a new organization. I'm also a co-founder of Global Witness. So I was just thinking about what you were saying, Alex, in terms of the work in the UK. I have a question that you may not be able to answer now, but maybe I could flesh it out, which is the role of lawyers as enablers. And here I'm talking about not the right to defense, which I would strongly defend, but where the lawyers clearly, and we've had many experiences of this in the past, go beyond the defense of your client and well into the gangster's consigliere role. And that becomes very nasty and on occasion brings in threats to life, limb, certainly harassment, nasty stuff. And in my experience, there are 3 firms that specialize this in the UK. One is Schillings, one is Mishcon de Rare, and the other is Carter Ruck. If you read the satirical magazine Private Eye, you will know the last one by a different name, which I won't repeat here because we're in polite company. There are probably some others, but they're the ones who we encounter over and over and over again. And I've been on the receiving end of direct threats from them and so on. It's really not very pleasant. And so the point I'm raising this is one of the things that I've found fascinating is in 1 year with a set of new investigations, I forget what they were, and it's a while ago now, we encountered all of these organizations over and over again, to the point where we concluded at the time rather facetiously, oh, there must be a flag or a big advertising booth somewhere in some dodgy part of the world where lots of corrupt people hang out, which says if you don't like nasty NGOs or journalists or somebody else and you want to take them off your back, come to us lot, we'll make a coin out of you because you're wealthy, because you're a kleptocrat, and we'll do them over in the nastiest possible way. And of course, London is one of the worst places to get sued. So very often, I think the counterattack is, Americans call these slaps, that terminology has come to the UK, but very often it's not even necessarily about winning, it's about spending you out of existence. And just to finish my point, I remember one occasion where we were attacked by the son of the president of Congo-Brazzaville, and in 3 days, we drained 3/4 of our bank account just defending ourselves. We were right. We won the case. The judge pronounced him as corrupt, which didn't go down very well for him. But we were basically mugged. Anyway, my question really is, in the course of your work, do you think it's possible, or would you be able to look at who pops up as an enabler from the legal profession and perhaps delve a little bit into the substance of what that actually entailed? Again, I repeat, not to get in the way of defense. Everyone should have defense. But there is a very clear dividing line, which I think is very often crossed, and we need to do something about that. Thanks.
I think we'll go to Jimmy, who had the first question, and then...
Thank you, Anna. So I think that they all start when we are in relation with the whistleblower. So we have, first of all, to define if the whistleblower wants to be anonymous or we want to be public. So because we used to analyze all the risk, even to make sure if he's supposed to stay in this country when we're going to publish our stories, or we're supposed to relocate him in another country. And what we are going to do, I think that we are having this discussion today with David, how we can help them to do their job, but still keeping, for example, the anonymity of whistleblower. So we used to analyze, because they need sometimes some specific document for being able to do their job. And we have to make sure also that the document that they will publish or the source that they will say in public don't expose the life of our whistleblower. So we are trying to make sure in each step that we are having that the whistleblower don't going to be in danger. So it's something that we are working on it, and we are still having discussion for them to be able to do correctly their job and to have a quality of investigation that is going to be public. So.
Thank you.
Good. On enablers, and I'll maybe answer Simon and Lanre's question at the same time. It's good to see you both. First is a plug. There's actually an enablers panel happening right now, so thank you, I guess, for being here. But on Thursday, there's another one that we're organizing called How to Catch an Enabler. And it's at 2:30 on Thursday, and there'll be a full discussion there of like, there's a lot like who's an enabler, who's not. We've all been in these meetings, but like trying to really drill down on, okay, when someone crosses the line, whether it's legal or ethical, what should happen to them? What should happen to these law firms that do show up over and over again in terms of law enforcement, in terms of their own kind of industry association, their reputations, so the kind of accountability mechanisms that apply to enablers. all of which are lacking right now, as Simon, alluded to, that they're not facing repercussions for the role they're playing in helping corrupt actors hide their money, go after journalists, et cetera, et cetera. A bit more related to this project, because it is kind of linked about turning data into information and then information into actual change. Like, when I was kind of talking about this project with the bosses at OCCRP, they're like, but we've been doing this for years. And it's like, yeah, exactly. We've been reporting on enablers for years. And yet, this issue is persisting as a massive challenge in the field. And so that's part of the driver, is like, how can we take the reporting we've done already, the information we have in-house, like in reporters' heads, as in addition to the databases, and try to make it available in ways that now that it is on the policy agenda, we can help move the needle. And that's really kind of driving, it's exactly your question, Lanre, that's driving this, is like, how do we take all these bits of information about individual transactions, individual service providers, and have it add up into something that will help, when the law enforcement agency does want to do something on enablers, help them have the information they need about which jurisdictions to focus on, which types of behaviors to focus on. So that's really the motivation, and there's so much more that needs to be done on this enablers issue that it'll take that effort, but then everything that you all are working on too.
Sure. We need a microphone for you. I think they record this.
My name is Helena Senek, and here I'm representing the project called rupep.org. And that was our attempt to do exactly what we were just discussing, to catalog everything, what was researched, what was published, what was discovered, leaked, etc. And we started 7 years ago with kind assistance of the National Endowment for Democracy to build this database. And by now, it includes politically exposed persons from Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and we recently started with Kyrgyzstan. And we are planning to grow. But what I can tell you, and I'm really proud of that first, all the OCCRP's publications we include. Everything what is published by whoever about individual, we include there. We also have information, and we research not only an individual, but all the connections, family connections, individual connections, company connections, business associates. We're helping to make sure that the individual who is making money by using his position and having access to budget money in one country cannot easily send his associates, relatives, and whoever in another country. And in our case, because of the war in Ukraine, because of the sanctions, we also been using information which we are having to support designation of individuals, to support the policy on prevention of sanction evasion, and we do often also use leak data, because what other data can you imagine in Belarus, and quite often in Russia? So we do use them, and we also follow the policy which you described, that we do not publish anything what might be not in public interest. So thank you very much. Sorry for that.
No, that's great, and I really appreciate you weighing in. I was just cognizant that they said that we have to get kicked out at 6:30, which is in 5 minutes. So I'm just going to ask my speakers if there is some, because I think if there's something about the how or the why that you heard from others today that sort of felt like a light bulb go off, or if there's anything else you want to add in 30 seconds or less. You get 30 seconds each. David?
Light bulb.
20 seconds. Just kidding. Just kidding.
I mean, I learned from all of the speakers. I'm trying to think something. I'm drawing on what other people have said that resonated, like a recap. I'm buying myself time.
All right, anyone else want to jump in on that one?
I think there wasn't a lot of tension in this panel, and I think that's a good thing and points to like, I do think creating spaces to have these conversations we're genuinely really interested in, because what we're doing feels new and exploratory and hard, but good, and that's a great, I think, moment to share experiences, like to hear more about not just the challenges of the data sources and the legal issues, all of which are really important, but like the types of analysis that you all are doing, the mapping strategies, kind of drawing on leaks. And I think would be interested in any efforts to kind of slowly and carefully grow these efforts, and so that if we convene at the next IACC, there's like 20 chairs up here instead of 5.
Yeah, and I would...
I can say something.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Good.
Okay.
That was just padding for you to get ready.
No, that's not better than what you said at all. I think a revolution was up here is that I think we all made it sound easy to do, because we're at the end of the like trust building process and the data sharing, and I think being up here made me kind of reflect that it wasn't always easy, and that it's taken a long time to get to this stage, years in some ways, and there's just been so many different, I hate to use the word, stakeholders that have weighed in on the process, and I think maybe just trying to convey that we're very nonchalantly discussing our present and future successes, but I think there's still a lot of investment that needs to happen to replicate some of the experiences up here, and hopefully we've shed some blood that won't need to be shed again by other people. And I think that was a revelation that I had after listening to all the stories of all of you all.
Really important. Jimmy?
If I have to maybe to add something, it's just to encourage us to be able to build these collaborations. Well, as I said, I think that journalists can help, academics can help also. I think that we can start talking about whistleblower, but the results that we can have from academics can help also to change the situation of whistleblower in our communities. So.
Is this like our closing remarks, basically?
I'm going to also say, I have 30 seconds for you.
Okay. This also sort of answers Lonnery's question, and how does this data turn into information? With DDoS secrets, I am like the only one in the collective that kind of has like a background in like financial crime. And so sometimes like we'll get a data set and I'll be like, oh my God, there are so many people that need to get eyes on this. And like, how does this data turn into information? It's this room. Like, you know, in 2 months when we roll out our new limited distribution access system, I would ask all of you, you know, instead of maybe spending a night unwinding by doing a puzzle, request a data set and read through some emails of like a Cypriot lawyer. It's actually pretty fun. You'll find some cool information in there. But we really rely on civil society, journalists, and like anyone who's sitting here for the entirety of this talk. Like, you know, please reach out, please be in touch. I love hearing about the work that people do, and in my head, I'm already thinking, oh, this country, or like, you know, like environmental destruction. Like, what can I point them toward? What can I get them access to? Yeah. And so, it's cool.
And just to close, I mean, it's really hard to close on this because it is just a beginning conversation we're hoping to create more of, everyone here. And it is about like the why, and going back to Alex's point, the why is because we need to gather intelligence and extract that intelligence in ways that does 3 things. Storytelling to raise public awareness and increase public pressure. Evidence-based policy, and that's where we see a lot coming from academia that we know we're going to need if we want to have more effective institutions and more systems-based approach to the problems, and not just constantly be chasing oligarchs, but always, of course, enforcement, because impunity of kleptocracy has a real knock-on effect to a public wanting to engage and to advocate. So, and I think of this as part of that networking of networks and also distributing capacities for intelligence in ways that has stronger impact. But really appreciate the time, and I know we all want to run to the next panel that is a masterclass by ICI Jet.
Thank you.
Not here, somewhere else. Thank you, everyone.